No way he said this as Jim Rutherford boldly addresses the Quinn Hughes-sized elephant in the room as everyone is urging the Canucks to sign him immediately. But first, Jim also touches on the batch of young studs that are eager for their NHL opportunities and breakouts this season. We're going to break it down all that in this episode of Canucks Digest, but first, if you're not a part of the nearly 42% of viewers who are already subscribed to the channel and you want to stay up to date on all things Canucks, make sure to hit that subscribe button and the bell icon so you don't miss any of the episodes when they drop. And with that, let's hop into the first topic of the day, which is the young studs. So Jim Rutherford made an appearance on the 100% podcast recently this week, and he was talking about some of the young players as well as Quinn Hughes, which we're going to touch on in a second. But sticking with the young players, he said that we know that these young guys are going to be good NHL players. Are they ready to play 82 games? Are they ready to help us get into the playoffs? That's something that we'll see along here as we go. And nobody has that answer until we get into the season. But at the same time, the coaches usually like to go with veteran players. And we know that there's an area of our team we'd like to make stronger, even though we like our center ice position. But at the same time, if we could add another centerpiece to get more depth there, we'd feel much more comfortable about our team. Now, sticking with the young players to start off here, Jim's making a really good point that the coaches will usually go with the veteran players, but having guys that can play 82 games is a big part of the attrition of the NHL. We know that we didn't have too many Canucks players reach 82 games last season, but having a lot of faith in these young guys, can they have that endurance, that attrition to last 82 games? Can they keep them in these games? We're going to see very early on in the season what these players are made of, but a lot of them still need a little bit more time. We know Braden Coots is a big story coming out of Canucks training camp. Jim also touched on him, saying that they want to just do what's best for his development. So whether that means getting a few games in the NHL and then going back to the WHL, that is going to remain to be seen. But overall, I think Braden Coots will probably get a very limited spotlight in the NHL, at least this season, probably the first 9 to 10 games. Then he'll go back to the WHL where he's just going to absolutely light it up and just continue developing. Then he'll have one season in Abbotsford probably where he's going to just succeed under Manny Malhotra as their head coach, who was recently extended. So they got him locked down for a little bit where he can develop these pieces to make sure that they are there for a long time and are perfect for this Vancouver Canucks big club, especially if they plan to have Quinn. Not only do they plan to have Quinn Hughes around for a long time, if they are able to get Quinn Hughes around for a long time, having these players around him and having a guy like Braden Coots, who is a natural born leader, the youngest captain in the WHL last season. He already showed some leadership within this training camp and just how he just had to play with a chip on his shoulder in this training camp and in the preseason. He has a lot of upside, and you bring in a guy like that could be a future assistant captain along with Quinn Hughes, or just a future captain once Quinn Hughes just reaches the end of his contract or whatever, if Braden Coots is just a long tenured Vancouver Canuck, where if it's 10 years down the line and that mantle is passed off to Braden Coots, he would be a very fitting captain if that were the case. But we don't want to get too ahead of ourselves here. These young guys are going to get opportunities, but it's a matter of how can they be in as far as an NHL level. Will they adjust very quickly? Will they sink or will they swim? That is what these first 10 games are going to be all about, and seeing what the best fit is, not only for this team, but also for Quinn Hughes, and making sure that it's the most appealing to keep him there, which Jim did talk about that we're going to get into in a second. But going on to the second part of it was the center depth, where Jim did talk about how Petey had a really good offseason, feels right mentally and physically, came in, had a really good training camp. Filip Hronek, if he can stay healthy, they feel good about him at center, and as well as Teddy Bluger and Aatu Räty being another young guy who's been a big impact on this Vancouver Canucks roster, especially in the face-off circle. That is going to be something for Vancouver, as long as they can stay healthy. Should be okay in the center depth area, but like Jim said, if you can add another piece, that is always critical, and you want to do that as much as you can. As much as you love some of these players, Aatu Räty, he's still been really solid. Hasn't been perfect, and much like a lot of fourth-line centers aren't, there's a lot of room to improve there, and you can kind of bolster down a bit more. But if the Canucks are in a position where they can have 3 solid centers and have 3 lines deep where they're absolutely stacked there and solid, and you rotate Räty and Bluger in and out of that 4th spot, maybe the Canucks are in a much better position than they would be to start the year. Actually, that's not to say it. I think that, I know that, because you bring in extra guys, that is a much better opportunity that you have to win. And winning is the big thing for the Vancouver Canucks. Obviously, you want to win, but it's not just winning for the Vancouver Canucks. It's all about keeping Quinn Hughes here. And that's going to take us into the second topic of the day, which is no way that Jim said this. I mean, if you're a Vancouver Canucks fan, you can believe what he said on this podcast, which we're going to hop into in a second here. But talking about that Hughes problem is the Hughes appeal. One of our best players is 2 years away from free agency, and it's important for us to do everything we can to make sure the Vancouver Canucks are as appealing as possible for Quinn Hughes. So that's winning games, that's getting the right players around him, that's drafting right, and just making sure that not only are your pieces now going to make Quinn Hughes happy, but your pieces in the future are going to keep Quinn Hughes happy. That's where Braden Coots comes in, that's where Lekkerimaki comes in, that's where Willander comes in, that's where Junior Petey comes in with Elias Pettersson at the defensive position. And you have so many different options there. Of course, Filip Hronek being recently extended, that's there for a while, so he has his co-pilot there for the next 7 years at least with Hronek's contract, maybe even longer if Quinn Hughes is extended, then Hronek gets another extension, but down the line. But again, don't want to get too ahead of ourselves. But overall, you want to make sure that you're in the best position to win, to keep your best player happy. You see that with a lot of teams, and it's no secret in the NHL. You see what the Wild just did with Kaprizov. That is a big part of it, is making sure that you have a team to contend and keep your best player happy. But this is where it gets a little bit interesting, is that Jim said that we're a long ways from it. We could run that decision out until the trade deadline, and that's not this trade deadline, but the year after, and still get a great return on him. Now, when I first heard this, my jaw was dropped for a good solid 2 minutes at least, because I could not believe that Jim would actually say something like this. I mean, I can, but I also can't, because he's not saying anything wrong here, especially when he says that's not what we're looking for, that's not what our goal is. Our goal is to have Quinn Hughes be a Vancouver Canuck for a long time. So quickly rectifying what he was saying here, but just sticking on this for a second. We know that Jim likes to just shoot from the hip and just say what he means and speak honestly. He did touch on that later on in the interview as well, where he's saying that this is something that everybody's going to talk about. It's a huge story with the Vancouver Canucks, probably the biggest story, especially now that Petey has had the JT Miller noise away. And once the season gets started, that noise is going to go back on Petey for the most part, but it's going to be split between Quinn Hughes and Elias Pettersson as far as the noise and the stories around this team that's going to generate the most buzz. Obviously, they're the two biggest players on the team. But within this as well, Jim Rutherford, when you're in a position like this, there are things you can and cannot say to the media. You can say it behind closed doors to your players, to your staff, to your personal friends or people in your family life or things like that, where if you guys follow the NFL, recently we saw with the Tennessee Titans, their number 1 overall pick, their quarterback, face of the franchise, Cam Ward, saying how much their team sucks. Not to say that Jim is doing that, but he's gotten close to saying things like that in a sense. So when you're in a position where you're a president of hockey operations, there are certain things that, whether you're right or wrong about them, you can't say to the media very openly like that. There are certain coach speak or manager speak or certain kind of smoke and mirrors things that you can say without actually saying it. And that's where it becomes a fun part of the media, where they can kind of run with it. But that's also probably what Jim is trying to avoid here as well, is the media running with something that he's saying and just making a whole big deal out of it, like Vancouver media tends to do. We can be victims of that sometimes, but we go where the story is, of course. And then once the further information comes out, we go back on some things or we reinforce some things. That's just the way that every sports show goes. And with this in Vancouver, you have a president of hockey operations who does not give a damn what he says and will speak his mind and speak honestly, whether you like it or not. So for better or for worse, what Jim's saying here, I totally agree with him. It's just shocking to see him say something like this where he's accepting that as a possibility. Could also be a little bit of a tactic as well, who knows? But they're just it's more of those things where prepare for the worst and hope for the best. And that's what Jim is doing here, where he's saying, hey, if we don't make it happen this year with a contract extension, at least we have the trade deadline next year where we can get a more than great return for him, which is terrible to think and a horrible thing to even say or consider. But it's one of the things that you do have to consider, especially in the nature of the NHL. And when you have a player, not only with the talent of Quinn Hughes, but when his brothers, 2 of them, are playing on the same team somewhere else on the East Coast, and he has an opportunity to do that and be closer to home as well in where New Jersey to Michigan is a lot closer than it is from Vancouver to Michigan. Being from Windsor, I know that is a very long flight. It's about 5.5 hours, not counting layovers and connecting flights and things like that. So that is a very long distance for Quinn Hughes to travel in the off season. Not saying that he doesn't hate that traveling. I know with these guys making a lot of money, that's not really a big factor, but still is something where he is separated from his family and is basically on the other side of the country from coast to coast. So if he's in a position where he can go play with his brothers, be on the East Coast, be closer to home and in the same time zone, maybe he's going to jump at that opportunity. So Jim is just preparing for that happening. But at the end of the day, Jim Rutherford wants to get them back here, gets Quinn Hughes back here as a Vancouver Canuck for a very long time, because they are not looking to get rid of him, because he is a generational talent. This kid is going to be the Bobby Orr of his era, and you cannot let him walk out the door for nothing, especially when you're the Vancouver Canucks, who would need to win a Stanley Cup in the next couple of years, or their fan base is going to get very antsy, just like they have over the past couple of decades, where you see these go in waves with the Canucks, where the Stanley Cup window opens or the playoff window opens, and it shuts just as fast as it was opened up. That's not what we want this time around. We want to make sure that we have a franchise star in Quinn Hughes, where we haven't had a franchise star like this. You can say Elias Pettersson, you can say Boeser, but really an impactful franchise star like this since the Sedins, and we don't want to let a guy walk out like that, especially when it could be to go play with his brothers and potentially win a Stanley Cup with the New Jersey Devils. Especially if he goes and wins the Cup, that would be a big slap in the face for the Canucks and their fans. But here's to hoping that the Canucks can get something turned around and get him signed. Hopefully this year, maybe next year. Who knows? They're not in any rush to do it, but they are making sure that it is at the forefront of everything that they do as far as roster moves, trades, free agency, and things like that. It seems to all be focused around making sure that Quinn Hughes is happy and it is appealing for him to stay in Vancouver. But what is your guys' thoughts on all this that we covered in this video? What do you guys think about Jim's comments? Do you think it was a little salacious to go the route that he was going as far as talking about a return on Quinn Hughes? Or is this just something that you've come to expect from Jim Rutherford nowadays with the way that he's talking? In my opinion, maybe get away from a microphone for a little bit. I know that it's great to run with these quotes and they make for great videos and they make for great television, great articles. But Jim, maybe back away from the microphone a little bit and let the season kind of unfold and let things happen. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments below and what you guys think about the Canucks preseason game tonight against the Calgary Flames. Let us know down in the comments below. But that's going to do it for this episode of Canucks Digest. I've been your host, Griffen. Take care.